Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm here as always with my co-host John Mixon. John, how are you doing?
Good, Dan. It sounds like you've got a bit of a cold, right? I think I had COVID a little while ago again, and just like
I was like last weekend and the week before. I was so I was kind of in bed for 2 days, and I'm pretty touch wood. I'm normally pretty lucky. It doesn't get hit that hard, and then I just about got well enough to go to BET because the BET show was in London last week, the big EdTech trade show.
that's right.
And that was just full on. We were Apps Events were running the Google experience, so we had like 6 people running that. We had a stand as well for the first time,
Cool.
doing meetups, and I was really, it was the worst thing, like I almost didn't go, and so I'm just kind of starting to recover. I'm going to take it a bit easy the next few days, but yeah, I've been a bit of a sick, but it happens. I think
You're
it
in
was
sunny
COVID.
Prague now, so everyth's fine.
Exactly. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, I've been, as always, busy and was a few in the past a couple ski camps and always fun to work with kids outside of the context of the classroom. So
Yeah, where
that's
were you
been
skiing?
really up in the Porte du Soleil in a part of Switzerland that straddles France. It's a big ski area, lovely setup, and just great to see the kids outside and how much they do enjoy, even the ones that are learning. The kind of positive attitude to trying to overcome the challenges of the physics of skiing, which is just
It's
lovely.
great. My
Anyway,
um my son's like, I mean, I'm really encouraging him, obviously, because I love skiing and snowboarding. That's my main thing, and he's doing really well. He's 5. He won the race. If they have a ski race every week in Austria. We
cool,
have a place in Austria. He was all against local kids, 5 and 6, and won the race. I was really pleased, because
good,
so I hope he sticks with it. There's a local ski club here near where we live in Prague, so I want to get him into it definitely. And he's
fantastic.
snowboarding as well.
Oh, that's congratulations. That's exciting. Yeah, it's always nice as a parent to see your children's do well in those situations. That's fantastic.
Definitely. Although everyone says you can't expect your children to like all the same things you do. Even though I'm trying to make it happen, but I don't think it's going to happen. Great.
Wait till he gets onto the video game console, and then you'll have to have a different conversation.
He already tries to get on hold of that. That's already losing that battle. But we're here to have Dale Plotzki here. I've known Dale for a while. Been lucky enough to hang out with Dale in Peru and in South Korea. So Dale, really interesting guy, doing a lot of stuff in technology and international schools. So Dale, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. I wanted to start by saying thank you so much. When I first heard about the podcast, I think when you came to visit us in Busan, that was when I started listening to it. And I swear, this is one of the most relevant podcasts to my entire life. So every episode that comes out, I just am blown away by how much value you guys are bringing to international schools and to teachers, and you're doing just fantastic work. So it's a real pleasure to be here with you guys.
Thank you, Dale. That's very kind. Really appreciate that.
Yeah.
So Dale, it would be great just to quickly give us a run, because let's set the scene for today. This was kind of a bit of this came off a chat, Google chat between Dale and myself, and Dale mentioned Bitcoin. Dale and me are both interested in cryptocurrency and how it fits into savings in general for teachers and international school people. Should you be thinking about it? So we thought we'd have a quick chat about it. But in the beginning, I'd love to talk a little bit. I always like the travel and the living abroad stuff. So, Dale, it'd be great to first of all get your story, and I'd love to find out a bit about what's it like living where you do. First of all, so can you just run us through your background, what you've done work-wise, and where you've lived?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a third culture kid. I grew up in a lot of the international schools that we probably all know and love. I did my teaching college in University of Victoria in British Columbia, Canada. And from there, I knew right away that I wanted to go international. So I did a practicum in Wrocław, Poland, which I'm sure you know of and have been to.
Yeah, my wife's from Poland, actually, so I've been to Wrocław many times.
Yeah, beautiful little school and beautiful city. And then from there, I did 2 years in Ecuador at a really great small little school, a great kind of starter place to get your first experience. And from there, it was just south of the border. I went down to Peru and ended up loving Peru immensely. So I did 7 years in Peru. And from there, I met my wife. I had a career change. And together we moved to Busan right at the time of the pandemic. So about 4 years ago. And so this is my most current posting. And we've been here for about 4 years now.
Great. I remember I went to your apartment in Lima, Peru, where you were working. It was overlooking the beach, and we went surfing. We walked down. You can actually walk down the path to right in the city, but you can actually there was a surf beach there, so it was really cool.
Yeah, Lima's a
Dale,
fantastic city. I mean, if you've ever get the chance to go, absolutely go. A lot of people go to Peru and they just go straight to Machu Picchu and they come do that circuit. But if you ever get the chance, spend a good few days in Lima because it is a world-class, fantastic city.
Dale, I'm just thinking Peru, the beaches, the surfing, and the culture, and then going to South Korea, having lived in East Asia for many years. Talk about two very different cultures, but are there any similarities?
Well, before Dale said there is surf right where Dale works in Busan. There's we went to the beach.
Okay, there's a similarity. Nice.
There's a similarity. It's funny. I say that the two countries are almost complete polar opposites. And that is in the best ways and also in the worst ways. So Lima, I love it and it's a wonderful city, but it is super chaotic, super disorganized. It's the loudest city you've ever been to in your entire life. And Korea is very much like the flip side of that. So it's hyper organized, orderly, calm, easygoing. It's super safe living here. It's very, very beautiful. So they are totally different places. But we're very, very grateful to actually be here because it is such a wonderful place to be in. So much of the focus of Korea goes to Seoul and the greater kind of Seoul area, but Busan is just like a little slice of heaven. If you've ever been to Vancouver, it's very similar to that. So you have beaches, mountains, forest, everything is just right there in the city. It's fantastic.
Tell us a bit about Busan. Obviously, it seems to be booming. It seemed like it was just a whole construction site there when we were there. I was there. We were on a Google Summit at your school, which was fantastic. Was it last year? I think it was last year.
Yeah, November 2022.
Yeah. Just over a year. So what's happening in Busan? Why is it becoming this big thing? Why is there international schools there?
Yeah. So Busan is actually one of Asia's most important ports. And so that's what brings in a lot of the international kids as well. There's a massive shipbuilding industry here. So we have a lot of people from Norway who have the expertise, and a lot of people come to do work in the ship industry. And then, unfortunately, another big thing that was on the radar was we were in the running. We were one of the finalists for the World Expo 2030. And that just ended up going to Riyadh just about a month ago. So it was quite disheartening.
Oh, yeah.
But it really is like an up and coming city and a really vibrant, beautiful city in Korea. And not one that I think is on a lot of people's radar. But if you ever get the chance to come to Korea, you've got to come down here and see it because it's fantastic. Very different than Seoul, but very, very good.
It's interesting because I think so often when, you haven't visited those countries, you kind of focus on one city or one area. I mean, I think Peru, for me, straight away, Machu Picchu, the Incas, and you don't think of the big cities that there are. And I think Dan is just highlighting that with Korea. We think of Seoul as kind of the center and where all the focus is. But I think it's just so enriching to hear stories from people like yourself that are living in other parts and saying, hold on, this looks like Vancouver, or, there are all these wonderful things. Do you, like you said, you were a third culture child. How was transition from a very Latino, South American, bustling, noisy city to something that was far more, again, industrial, but very organized, almost like everything's mapped out quite clearly? How did you deal with that transition?
Again, it's tough to say that one is better than the other, or I liked one aspect of the other. I mean, there's serious safety concerns in Lima. We'll put it that way. It's, as much as I love it, you have to keep your wits about you. You have to be very aware of where you are and what you're doing. Whereas in Korea, you can just basically let go. So it's hyper safe. There's nothing with theft or violence here, which is really, really is really quite nice. And so we found that aspect of the transition, wonderful. On the flip side of that, Korea is, it's one of the most homogenous countries on earth. It may be the most homogenous on earth. So on that end of the spectrum, it can be quite hard to come in as an outsider and to really fit into the culture because it is such a closely knit country where most people speak the same language, have the exact same culture, the exact same type of background. So as an outsider, it can be a little bit hard to break in, a little bit harder than Latin America, I'd say, for sure.
It's interesting. I was there for a month with my family. When I met you, actually, we stayed in Seoul for a month. We had just actually 6 weeks maybe. So we actually got into the life a little bit, which was cool. It's very interesting, surprising how little English. Like a lot of people were really weren't confident enough to talk English with you, and it was very strange. What was really strange is like, because most Asian countries are very, very polite, and South Korea, it is polite on one level, but on another level, for example, we have 2 young children with us, and we were taking like public transport, buses and things, because buses are great in Seoul, really easy to get around everywhere, and like we were struggling getting prams on and things. Like nobody would ever help, nobody would ever give up a seat for my wife if my wife would by herself with 2 young kids, never. And old people, maybe somebody over like 70 would do it. Nobody else. No contact, no help. And it was weird because that's really unusual. Like you don't see that in other Asian countries. It's a bit more sort of polite in that sense of being with kids and stuff. So
well, one kind of defining feature about South Korea is that it, I believe, has the world's fastest shrinking population. So kids are becoming less and less common. Yeah. And there's a lot of spaces popping up that say there's no kids allowed here for cafes, study cafes, things like that.
Yeah.
On the flip side, there's also like a big kind of pushback of that, of other businesses being like, no, like we have to start embracing kids and welcoming children into environments. But it is a very structured country. And, we were traveling on the KTX, the big national high-speed rail line with our baby. And babies do baby things. They make noise. I remember, an employee, super polite and nice, but coming up to us and being like, hey, quiet up the baby. And we're like, oh.
Yeah, it's not easy. What are the other areas people could live? Because what's really interesting to me about South Korea international schools is Jeju, which Dale, I'm sure you can talk about. It's a big island to the south. Loads of international schools there, which it seems to me are mostly focused on Chinese expats sending their kids there.
Yeah, so Jeju is a beautiful, beautiful place. They call it the Hawaii of Korea. It's a UNESCO recognized beautiful heritage space. And what they've done there is they've set up kind of an exclusive zone for opening international schools. So all of the schools are in one very small little geographic area. Typically, like at my school, if you want to come to the school and you're a Korean national, you have to have lived outside of the country for a set amount of time. That's not the case in Jeju. So what it is a place where Korean kids and, like you said, kids from outside of the country, from China, can come. They can get kind of an international style education, and they don't have to meet that requirement of having lived outside of the country. So that is one option that we have in Korea as well. And Jeju is stunningly beautiful. If you ever get the chance, you definitely got to go check out. It really is a neat place.
My understanding is a lot of these schools are also focused on getting. There's a lot of have boarding facilities and focusing on getting Chinese nationals to send their kids out, because obviously with it's kind of a bit of a crackdown on international schools in China. So I heard that's becoming a big trend.
Yeah, they're also, there's a bit of a different shift in focus in some of those schools as well. So they are also that highly competitive academic type background, whereas in maybe more of your more established schools on the mainland, it's more of that international education about inquiry, about service, about things like that. Whereas in Jeju, the reputation, and maybe I could be wrong about this, is that it's still quite focused on those really.
What I found fascinating visiting a lot of schools in South Korea is, well, firstly, I believe the classification is a foreign school. So what we call an international school is it's classified as a foreign school. International schools means something different. Yeah. And it's like you said, Dale, like it's quite hard for Korean nationals to send their children to the foreign schools. But then you go to these schools and it's like almost all Koreans. And then, so what people were saying is like the lengths people go, if you live abroad for 3 years, your kids can go to a foreign school. So people will move abroad for 3 years or even send their kids abroad for 3 years. If they get a foreign passport, so people who've got money will get like a South American passport and etc. and get in on that. And so it's kind of, it's just amazing the sort of lengths people go to get their kids into these schools.
South Korea values education and high performance education more than pretty much any other country on earth. And so I'm sure you've heard about the national exams that they run here, about just how intensely it's taken in terms of not only performance, but the conditions that the kids need to be tested. And I think there was a case in the news where some students sued either the school or the teacher, not exactly sure which one it was, for having stopped the test 2 minutes early. Because the testing is that high stakes here. Airplanes are not allowed to fly over top of the schools. Traffic is rerouted around schools, just so that when these kids go and do these tests, that they can have optimal conditions. So it is an interesting place because, there is such a strong focus and respect for education.
And tell us about that, the Hagwons, and what they are and how, because that's for me was fascinating, how hard the kids work and what they have to do after school. So can you explain that to the listeners?
Yeah. So it's kind of a system of after school care, we'll call it. That can be anything. It can be practicing English, practicing math, practicing science, practicing sport, practicing art. And it's school after school. So kids will come home and they will, immediately go off to Hagwon. Usually a bus comes and picks them up, and they can be there until 7, 8, 9, or 10 at night.
Yeah, I've heard in Seoul like 10 o'clock, 10 p.m. often.
Yeah, I've come back from walking my dog at night, and there's little kids who are 6, 7 years old getting off the bus and coming back from Hagwon. But a big part of it is not just the push for education. That is a part of it, but a big part of it is childcare. So when your parents are out of the house and they're working super hard until all hours of the night, you need a place to go. So it fills kind of that aspect of it as well. And a lot of Hagwons are really just kind of like clubs to hang out in, and kind of a place to be watched and be taken care of as well. So they can be a lot of things depending on.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because the kind of world which the three of us grew up in, education-wise, this is just so foreign, the mentality.
I couldn't do it. There's no way.
Oh no, I mean you see that across Asia. Every country has its differences, from Taiwan to China to Thailand. There's much more of a focus. But then when you get to South Korea, Japan, it's just a different. Taiwan, I think, is similar as well. Just
China.
Crazy level of focus on passing exams, and it seems a lot of it in Korea because everybody, you have these large cabals, these big companies, the Samsungs, and there's these huge Korean companies, and everybody wants to pass the exam to get a job with these companies, which is very competitive. So it's kind of a pyramid which everyone's fighting to get to the top of.
Yeah. What's interesting is that actually, if you look at a lot of IB students, they're actually doing their spring break and winter break at Crammers. They're going to England. There's much more going on of a business to get kids to pass exams, right. GREs, SATs. I think as the sense of competition is a global, you definitely see more and more companies doing special tutoring to kids to make sure they pass their IB physics or whatever. There are often a lot of revision papers and things like that. So I think it's so interesting. I'm just happy because school was enough. I didn't need to go to another hour and a half of more schooling as a kid or adolescent. Dale, do you find this whole culture that Dan and you are sharing about the crammers and the childcare and this emphasis on academics, does that filter into a school like yours? They always say your school adopts the culture that it's in. Do you find that the sense of academic pressure is somewhat there, or is it very different being in an international school? You don't get impacted by that culture?
We're aware of it, and it can trickle in some ways, but ISB it's a fantastic school. It's an inclusive school, so we have kids who come in who have all sorts of neurodiversity and different abilities as well, and we're a true international school, so we have kids coming from name your country around the planet. But on that said, we do have plenty of Korean students, and plenty of them who do go to Hagwon, and plenty of them who are there until 9 or 10 at night. So it is kind of a cultural competency that we have to be aware of, is that some of our kids are starting the day on the short end of the stick. Like they got home at 10 when I was already in bed. That's when they got home and started doing their unwinding, and maybe they were actually in bed and sleeping at 12:30. So that is something that we need to be aware of when it comes to working with the community, for sure.
Yeah, I remember I was at Korea International School, and the tech director there was saying it's really common for the kids to go to the Hagwon. They finish at 10, they go home, play video games till 1 a.m, come back, and they're just falling asleep in the first 2 lessons, like in school. It's like really common.
Poor kids.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's amazing. Dale, John, any other questions about South Korea? I mean, Dale, to finish the South Korean challenge, would you recommend it? Who would? Huge generalization, trigger warning, but like who would benefit to go there? Is it good for single people, married couples? Where would you go? Like what like just general things could you think of to say about people thinking about career? Is it a good place to save money? Is it what's the big picture?
Like any other country, in terms of finances, I think it would determine how you live and how you like to spend your money and how you like to save. So yeah, of course you could save money here and stuff. I would say who I would recommend South Korea for would be someone kind of similar to me, someone who's been in maybe postings in schools that have been maybe a little bit in countries where there's been a lot of, let's say, excitement, maybe a little less organization, and maybe you're looking for a change of pace. Because, oftentimes when I was at the school in Peru, it could be hard to keep teachers there, and not because of the school. It was actually the city that they had a hard time with. They just had a hard time being in such a kind of a wild, chaotic environment. So who I'd recommend it for is maybe for someone who's looking for like a little bit more of a structured, orderly place to be in their life. And again, just a fantastically beautiful hospital, safe, great country to be in. Yeah. But yeah, saving money, maybe you might want to think of a few other countries because life in Korea is pretty expensive.
It's interesting because I think, we often ask that question, and I am hearing more and more the saving power that, when I first started my career, people would actually pick schools based on packages. I think that whole thing has changed dramatically, especially because of the cost of living, inflation, COVID, and geopolitical situations. I think saving powers have definitely changed quite differently, and they're not what they were maybe 20 years ago when people would go to a compound school in the middle of the desert and do 10 years and then retire.
But I think, John, we did the Saudi Arabian roundtable last week, which was super interesting. And, those in Saudi Arabia, people are saving a lot of money, especially if you're a teaching couple. Like, I think, that's a place where you can definitely, save a lot, tax-free. I think that's one of a few places which is still out there.
But on a more important topic, crypto, I want to make $1 million. Tell me, both of you, we were going to talk about kind of the Bitcoin and crypto. Dan, what are just, because you and Dale have been chatting about that. I'd love to hear kind of what are some of the things that you guys are bouncing back and forth on that topic.
Cheers, John. So Dale sent me an email saying, let's talk about crypto. And Dale and me have had a few chats about this in the past. We're both interested in it. So I thought it'd be great. I mean, should teachers be thinking about it? I'm sure hopefully we'll get some people commenting. Some people might hate it, some might like it. But I guess a good place to start is I can tell you the story of how I almost became a billionaire, but didn't. That's a good one. And I'm just checking my email. The date was November the 26th, 2011. It's a completely true story. John, this is about the time we met, actually, when we ran the first Google workshop for educators, and I started working with you guys. And I was single at the time. I was in Prague, and Sunday morning I was lying in bed with a bit of a hangover, as single life in Prague entails. And I had my Wired magazine, and I used to subscribe to. I don't know if anyone likes Wired. I think it's gone kind of downhill, side point nowadays. But I used to be an avid reader of Wired magazine, and I read about Bitcoin, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. And I was doing my coffee, and I was just reading about Bitcoin. I thought, this is unbelievable. And I got straight on the internet and started looking at Bitcoin, and I found out there was a Bitcoin conference happening in Prague that exact weekend. The first ever Bitcoin conference anywhere in the world was happening in Prague that weekend. So I messaged the guy running it. I found an email. I said, look, I've got a press pass, because I do actually have a press pass. And said, can I come along today? It was the second day of the conference. He said, yeah, come along. I just read an email. We'll be happy to have you join us. Dad, I went to meet them. And so I spent a day in this event. There was people like Max Kaiser, you might have heard of. He's a slightly kind of crazy guy. And he used to be on RT. I'm not sure where he is now, but he was there hanging out with him, a bunch of other people asking questions, finding out. And I'd never heard of Bitcoin, and I was there. And Bitcoin at the time was about $3. It started off the year at $0.3, went up to 26, and then went down to 4.7. So that was kind of the range. And I was thinking at the time, so I just buy $1,000 of Bitcoin at this point, because it seems they convinced me. I was completely convinced by the whole thing. I was red pilled by everyone. I was like, this is going to be amazing. And I didn't buy anything. I did buy some shortly afterwards. So, don't feel sorry for me. I have got some Bitcoin, but $1,000, I was working out what that would be. That would be about, I wouldn't be a billionaire, actually. It'd be about probably 150 million, something like that. Or something. It would be enough. It would be enough to not have to worry about money.
I think it was just a few weeks ago, it turned 15 years old. So it's been around for 15 years. And I think everyone who's kind of everyone's heard of it by this point. So I think everyone has had like an experience or a story where they first like considered it and like opted out. And now they're kind of like, that was a huge missed opportunity. I have very vivid memories of walking through a surf town in Peru with a really great friend of mine. And we were both just laughing like, It's $1,000 now. Ship has sailed. It's over. It's
Yeah.
over. Those days are done. Like, congrats to those guys.
Well, it's interesting because I know people who did buy in 2011 and they sold when it got to like 1,000 because they were like, "Come on, this is amazing. I've made 1,000% return. Not 1,000 times return."
Yeah, exactly. If you've made that much, the odds of you holding it, forever and ever and ever are probably pretty slim. So
yeah.
But I think what's interesting about, and your two anecdotes are wonderful, is that I'm not involved in Bitcoin, but I have
Sure, John. Sure you're
inadvertently.
not.
What's that?
Sure you're not, John. That's okay.
Absolutely guaranteed I am not in Bitcoin. But the one thing, and I read a lot about it and I follow it, and I know Dan has brought it up a few times in our own conversations. It seems it's the story of missed millionaires, and there's a lot of very up and down. And whenever it blows into the press, I mean, Sam Bankman-Fried is a great example, but they were before that. They were, there have been different permutations of a similar story. And so what do you think yourselves is it about, if you're going to even be involved, you really have to be on top of your game and know what's going on and not get too greedy?
I would start off by saying, first of all, anything we talk about today, clearly not financial advice. Please don't anybody listen to this, buy anything based on what
I have the same note
say. Like, you just don't, we're just two guys on a podcast. We're not like Warren Buffett.
Yeah,
I think, it's first of all, and we could talk, like, it's such a massive topic. There's a great, highly recommend a podcast called What Bitcoin Did. I listen to a lot. There's a bunch of guy called Pomp has a great podcast. There's you can talk. People have daily podcasts about Bitcoin, so we're not going to cover much of it here. I guess it's just good to talk about what it is. I mean, Dale, maybe, because I think we've got Bitcoin and we've got crypto. I like I had said at the beginning, I see Bitcoin more as like the gold standard, and when we can talk about that. And then, most cryptocurrencies and most tokens, I think, will go to zero. But I don't know that. But Dale, do you want to just kick us off by like saying what is Bitcoin? What do we know about who founded it? And then we can get into like, should it be something that teachers have some of, and international school educators hold a bit of?
Yeah, and just before getting to that, I just want to add something to John's point. It is a highly volatile. There's no doubt about it. I'm not here to paper over that fact. And anytime this topic comes up with anyone, I say 4 years. 4 years, you have to hold on to this. Any less, there's a chance that you would have bought at the top and it'll go down. But after about 4 years, you're going to have lived through like a Bitcoin era, an epoch it's called, which means that you're now in a different period of the Bitcoin ledger. And after 4 years, pretty much you're in the clear, and no one has ever lost after 4 years. So that is one caveat.
So far.
It's a long-term project. So it's two things, actually. It's a computer network, which anyone can participate in. It's the world's most powerful computer network. It's a distributed ledger technology that keeps a running account of who has sent money and who has received money. That goes on forever, and that anyone can check and verify and look into. So that's one aspect of it. And the second aspect of it is a coin, a unit of currency. It's not a physical coin. That this network produces every 10 minutes. So we call it Big B is the network, Big B Bitcoin, and Little B Bitcoin is the actual unit of currency. So every 10 minutes, currently right now, there's 6 Bitcoins that are created. And when this podcast comes out, that will be going down to 3. So one of the things that makes it very different than other forms of money, which are always growing, Bitcoin is always becoming more and more and more scarce, more and more rare.
Exactly. And there's only ever going to be like 21 million Bitcoins created. And what you're referring to, Dale, is like the halving. Do you want to explain about the halving and how the mining difficult? What is mining, I guess? We could cover at a really high level.
Yeah. So just like you mine gold, Bitcoins have to be produced through energy, through what's called proof of work. So you have to expend energy here in the physical world to receive this digital form of money. And you do that by essentially solving very, very difficult math equations using specialized equipment. And so it's written into the code that after a certain number of blocks, which equates to be about 4 years worth of running, then the amount of Bitcoin that gets produced goes down by half. And what this does is it's a way to distribute Bitcoin to people who are actually participating in the network. And it's a way to again, make sure that it's something that is becoming more valuable in time as opposed to less valuable, like the cash in our pockets becomes less valuable over time.
Interesting.
And so what I understand, and correct me wrong, is that most of these financial type of investments are monitored by governmental organizations and or associations, et cetera. Is this true that Bitcoin actually isn't, or that's a misconception that there is some overarching
Nope.
body that's kind of keeping an eye on it?
I haven't heard anything to that effect, but it's a public open ledger. So anyone can audit it. Anyone can look at the transaction history between different wallets.
I mean,
You can take steps to make it more private if you'd like to, but part of its technology is that transparency aspect of it. So you can verify that people have what they say they have and have sent what they claim they have. So that is one big aspect of it for sure.
But John, just to say that no one controls it. It's a distributed ledger. Like, I've run a Bitcoin node. You can run a node to help run the network. I've run one on a server in the past. So nobody controls it, but people into Bitcoin would say that's a feature, not a bug. Because the fact that it's not, I mean, there's all kinds of people with different politics involved in Bitcoin. A lot of very libertarian type people who don't want the government involved. But whether or not you like the government the fact remains that if you look at, the US dollar used to be on a gold standard, which meant, you could exchange your US dollars for gold. The British pound was sterling because it was the same thing. And that's since the Nixon years, that's gone. And if you look at the amount of the trillions of US dollars that are getting printed, look, it kind of has a deflationary effect. So you can, I mean, obviously I'm sure some economists, I don't understand this in a lot of detail, but, the US government, if it needs to pay for a war or if it needs to pay for a social program or whatever, can just start printing money. Whereas Bitcoin, the reality is you cannot do that. It always, like Dale said, it's, you solve equations to get more Bitcoin, equations get harder over time. So it's inherently like a deflationary asset.
And one thing that also makes it quite interesting too, unlike other goods that become more valuable, we find more of it, right? So when oil becomes more valuable, we magically find more of it. When gold becomes more valuable, we're able to produce more of it. That is not the case with Bitcoin. So it's a perfectly inelastic good. No matter how much the price changes, goes up or down, we cannot do anything to produce more of it because it's hardwired into the code. So it's what they say, a money without rulers, but with rules. And so changing elements like that is not possible. So when you're buying it that there will always be 21 million of them, and that it can more or less cannot be created, and that the money that you're storing in it, your time that you're storing in it, will be held for the long term. And we can talk about that a little bit more, maybe with some more clear examples, maybe.
Sure.
So one of the things is that, for us on the sideline, not involved, you kind of hear the Hollywood stories of the bang and bust, and, people become millionaires overnight and then they lose everything. What is that volatility? Could you explain to a layperson, not, why might there be that volatility with Bitcoin?
I would say human nature. So as the cycle goes up and more people get interested in it, typically new people come in after a huge price run, and people become excited and interested and captivated by it. And so that's when you start seeing it rise up by $1,000 every few hours or whatever it may be. Nothing like that is sustainable. And so after all of these people come in, that's when generally people jump ship, or what we saw with recently in the news, many big businesses start to kind of collapse. Then you see the price come plummeting back down. But what's important to know is that over time, it's like a series of steps of big ups and big downs that's constantly kind of ticking upwards. And that's why I said that you have to hold it for a significant amount of time to kind of ride out and smooth out some of that volatility.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we can get into a minute about, should international school educators think about it. I think the first thing to say is you've got to be very, very, very careful with Bitcoin. You've got to be very careful, and because you'll speak to your friend in a pub and they'll say, what about this, Dogecoin or some random coin that like, and you know, look, I might be wrong, and those coins could be worth a lot, but I think if you are getting into crypto, there's no doubt in my mind you should only be thinking about Bitcoin in the beginning. You know, there's other things maybe in the future, but except most will go to zero. And but in terms of how you store the Bitcoin, I mean, Dale, we can get into your opinion. I mean, you've really got two options. I mean, most people, you will buy your Bitcoin on Coinbase. There's a bunch of other exchanges which everyone can find. Look up sort of Bitcoin exchanges, and that's kind of the simplest way to buy Bitcoin. When I first bought my Bitcoin, I would meet someone in McDonald's with their laptop, and I would give them the cash. Literally, I would give them the cash, and they would send me the Bitcoin. That's how it used to be. There's a website called Local Bitcoins, but most people buy in exchanges now. The thing about exchanges is, you have something called a personal key and a private key. And if somebody knows your private key, and a private key is a string of words, it could be 12, it could be 24. If somebody knows, like John, if I tell you those 12 words, you've got access to all my Bitcoin. You can just take it in 2 minutes. So that's the thing. The thing you got to be very careful of is once someone knows your private key, and the reason Bitcoin hasn't been hacked is that there's no supercomputer powerful enough to hack, this at the moment. But that's the thing to really know. There's a lot of ways to lose your Bitcoin. The exchange could get shut down. Obviously, everyone knows about FTX. But there is a way you can store your Bitcoins offline on a hardware wallet. On a computer not connected to the internet, even written down on a piece of paper. So there are ways to keep control of your keys and keep them off. So I think if you're looking at Bitcoin, and Dave, again, I want to get your perspective. I think obviously you're probably buying an exchange in the beginning, but I would start reading about controlling your own keys. And people, there's a saying in Bitcoin, not your keys, not your Bitcoin. You know, if like it's the exchange could take everything. Dale, what do you think about buying and storing Bitcoin?
Yeah, so my thoughts on this are, it's another thing that makes it very different than our normal financial system. So when I buy stocks, I buy them in an app. I never touch them. I never see them. Even the deed to a house is not something that you physically hold anymore. And most of our money in our bank accounts has gone electronic as well. It's not something we actually physically touch a lot of the time. Whereas Bitcoin, you have the chance of actually taking it and holding it yourself. And that's what's called a bearer asset, meaning the person that has it is the person who owns it. Just like a gold coin. If I pass Dan the gold coin, then Dan has the gold coin. There's no more claims on it. I would encourage people to consider when they buy Bitcoin to buy it and hold it themselves. That's really the magic of it. The good benefit of it comes when you're actually buying it and holding it yourself. That comes with a lot of responsibility. So like what Dan said, it's amazing to hold because you can store a lot of value with you. You can go in and out of a country as an international person, and your money is coming with you. It's undetectable. No one can seize it. No one can take it off of you. However, you have to be able to store that seed phrase properly and to understand exactly how it works, so you do not actually end up losing your Bitcoins. There's many, many cases of people who have lost their Bitcoins and who are, doing everything they can do to try and search through old garbage dumps, or to go through, houses that they lived in when they were in college, to try and find those magic 12 or 24 words to get back their Bitcoin. So knowing that if you want to hold it yourself, doing the time to take the research to understand how to store that seed phrase, how that private key, and how to actually take care of it responsibly, because there's no helpline. And if that Bitcoin goes away, and if someone else takes that private key, that's unfortunately on the user.
What I'm hearing is, if you are, and not that we're advising people in any way to do anything, but I'm hearing, as a person that's listening in, imagine we're at the coffee house having this conversation, is that with Bitcoin, there's a much bigger learning curve, and you really have to do your research.
Definitely.
Yeah, but I would caveat that with saying it's not insurmountable.
No, but it's not something like where you just go on an app and get
you can buy your Bitcoin very simply on an exchange, and then you can start learning from that point. I think it's always good to buy a small amount, and then you've got some skin in the game, and you might be interested just to see if it's could go somewhere.
Yeah,
because
I was just going to say that the benefits are also there to match the cost. So yes, there's more responsibility on you, but arguably when you are holding it and controlling yourself, the benefits of doing that, greatly outweigh the cost of the risk.
And I assume, Dale, that you're not the first teacher to be educator to be involved, or Dan. I assume there are a lot of good resources out there. I mean, that there must be communities, especially that it is so open-ended and transparent. There must be some really good resources for people to tap into.
Definitely. There's some great resources and there's also some terrible resources. It's something where you've got to really triangulate all the data points. If you hear someone recommending things, always, get other people's opinions. Yeah, there are some amazing sources, but, again, it is something you have to educate yourself on in terms of who's actually, telling you, giving you good advice, I would say.
And there's a lot of resources built specifically for complete beginners.
Yeah.
To bring them into the fold, to introduce the vocabulary, the terminology to them, and start getting them knowledgeable on the topic. One thing that I thought is kind of interesting, and why I thought it'd be a good idea to have this conversation is, I know a lot of your audience because I get to talk with them, and I recommend your podcast to a lot of different educators. And I know just how kind of tech savvy and smart a lot of international teachers are. And we're quick to jump on, to learn about new technology. I mean, absolutely every teacher is learning about AI, and to a very deep level, like training models and troubleshooting their own versions of different large language models. Yet I think, interestingly, I'm not quite sure why this is, but this particular area of technology is just not being talked about. It's not really being discussed. And I would argue that, a foundational change in the way we use money is as important as artificial intelligence, or is as important as the internet. So I do think it's something that, if there is a bit of a taboo there, or teachers are afraid to broach the topic, I do think it is something that we want to start being able to talk about a little bit more, because it has the potential to greatly impact everyone's life if it does become an important new source of the world's money.
Definitely.
And I think that's.
Sorry, John, after you.
I just think that's an important thing that you're highlighting, especially in the context of being educators, and that our kids will come into a world where it might not be Bitcoin, but it's going to be some type of technology where money is exchanged in a very different way than what we consider as the ATM card or the credit card or the debit card. So I think that's so important. I think part of that reason is that even as the public in general, we're very kind of not clear on what it is, because, it kind of started on the dark web, which might not be true, but that's kind of the myths around it really make it somewhat hard to kind of come to terms with and say, okay, I can get my head around this, because there's a lot of myths out there, and there's a lot of, kind of what I would say sensationalism tied to it. So as educators, I think, with AI and many other things, these are things that the general population is engaging with. But I don't know if those myths have really been a deterrent to us being able to understand the importance and how this can help.
I think you're right. I think it does put a lot of people off. And I think another point, though, is I think I know a lot of international school people who are involved in Bitcoin, but it's just something people don't talk about. Like, people don't talk about money, just in society. It's kind of in our
Fair
Western
enough.
society. It's just not something you really talk about. And so there are a lot of international school tech people who are into Bitcoin. Definitely. I just think they don't talk about it, in my opinion. Yeah.
Dale, what are your thoughts?
I would second what Dan says. So I'd say there's generally a taboo in general around talking about money, which is a shame, because I think oftentimes when we talk about kind of where education needs to be updated, or where we could be doing a better job, usually financial literacy is a big component of that. The other really cool thing about Bitcoin too is it really starts to shape your perceptions around many different things as well. So you start to think about, what makes the US dollar money? What makes time valuable? Why are, some scarce assets more valuable than others? So it really starts getting you kind of thinking about a lot of big issues that can have a lot of value to your life. One of the best things about it is it can seem like the future is looking a little bit brighter when you start learning about Bitcoin, when you realize that you can store your money in something that is going to become more valuable in the future as opposed to less. And when you start having like a bit of a brighter horizon, well, all of a sudden you want to start taking better care of your health. You start valuing your relationships maybe a little bit better, maintaining important relationships a little bit better. And so really one of the benefits of it is it just gives you a little bit more hope for tomorrow to know that, you know, we work so hard in schools and we pour so much of ourselves into our jobs in international schools. There's no doubt about that. And when we take that money at the end of the day, what we do with it, we want to make sure is leading to a much, much better tomorrow. And I think Bitcoin holds the potential to get teachers there.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that both of you highlighted the idea of the taboo of speaking about money, because financial literacy, you know, if you think of a lot of our children, especially in certain economic stratas, you know, money is not a big issue. But then they go out into the world and they get their first job or whatever, and often they do feel a little, you know, at a disadvantage because they just assume this money is going to keep coming, and suddenly the parents like, time out, it's over, you know. And so I think you bring up a really good point about the financial literacy. The other point I like that you brought out is this idea that, you know, we do put so much time and effort into the craft of teaching and being educators, and we're moving around, and often many of us don't have the pension plans that you would have if you're stuck at home. And so there is that, you know, and I think sometimes schools do a bit of a disservice because they're like, well, we don't have a pension plan, we just give you extra money. And people are like, oh, great, that means I can go on more holidays. And, you know, what responsibilities do organizations such as international schools have to do with financial literacy, not only towards the students, but also towards the faculty? And I know that can become a very delicate topic for school administrators. No, we're not getting into finance, but I don't know. What are your thoughts, both of you?
I've got a really quick point. Just Dale gave me a great resource. Expats and International School Educators Financial Advice. It's a Facebook group. And John, it's actually run by Andrew Hallam, the author of The Millionaire.
Oh, yeah, of course, that we interviewed, that we had here on the podcast.
Fantastic interview. And he's a really, really, really bright. I'm sure he would, if he was on his podcast, he'd be like, you morons, Bitcoin is like, I don't think he's a fan. But that's just a really good website. And Dale clued me into this website. And a lot of people on there are just giving each other terrible advice. You know, it's like, you know, in the comments, it's just like you realize a lot of people are not literate. And like John, like you said, John, you know, if you work for a school in Canada or the UK, you're in the state pension scheme. You don't have to think about it. You've got money for retirement. And I was reading a poll in this group recently that was saying 45% of international school teachers over 42 felt they are not on track to reach their retirement goals, which is kind of a scary number.
Yeah, and building off John's point, you know, sometimes teachers are signing contracts at schools as well that say, okay, I'm going to receive 50% of my pay in US dollars, and 50% is going to be in Brazilian real or yuan or Lebanese pound or whatever it may be. And that is a serious financial consideration that people need to be well aware of, that not all currencies behave like in the Western world. A lot of our currencies are fairly stable, but you know, if you are signing up to receive a part of your salary in a currency that's deflating at 15 or 20 or 30%, that has, you know, significant impacts. That means your money is gone in just a few years. You know, when it's inflating at that rate, your purchasing power. Yeah. So when we talk about financial literacy, it's not only for the kids, but it's also for teachers as well to know and understand how is the money that you are being paid going to stand up over time.
And John, something, John, you brought up on the podcast with Andrew is like you've worked in a lot of international schools and you've seen schools bring in these kind of financial advisors. A lot of them are just snake oil salesmen. You know, they take heavy commissions by whatever reason, through a connection with the parents or through paying or for something they've come to the school. And they're selling these products where, you know, if you read Andrew's book, like, you know, just a small percentage of management fee makes a huge difference to how much money you end up with.
And I think so often, you know, when you are in an international school and you meet some financial organization advisor, you're in an international water. So the taxes are very different sometimes. And then suddenly you bring this money home and suddenly your local tax office is like, hold on here, you know. So I think it's just, you have to be so adapt and understand, it's very multi-layered and multifaceted. And I think sometimes, at the end of a long day of teaching, people just are looking for a quick fix instead of really investing in the time and learning.
John, that's a fantastic point, and something that I also want to build on. Teachers don't have much of a choice. Like, you kind of have to play the investing game and make your picks and put your money where you hope it's going to work out best. Otherwise, you're not going to be prepared for retirement. You're forced to take these risks in order to grow your wage, in order to live for however long you're going to be on retirement. And I think a big part of that is just because our money just doesn't really work. If you just save money, that's not going to be enough. So by moving to Bitcoin and saying, I'm going to place my money in a hard asset that gets more valuable and more scarce over time, what it's also doing is taking off that kind of need to be going onto a Facebook group and hoping you get good advice and trying to make picks in the stock market, and just kind of taking a chance. Just like, every investment's a chance, but it allows you to not have to put so much emphasis on that investing aspect of your life, and maybe free up more of your time and focus for what you love to do, which I imagine is teaching and working in schools for most of our audience.
Yeah. Do you think culturally Bitcoin has different perceptions? Are there certain cultures that are much more comfortable from your experience, Dale? Like maybe
love it in South Korea.
Say that again?
In South Korea, they're all about it for sure.
Okay, so you've noticed that, and I'm sure you were involved in Peru. Was that as prominent there, or do you think there's certain parts of the world where Bitcoin, maybe it has to do with the technology buy-in and level of integration of technology in day-to-day life?
I think that's a big part of it for sure. So there wasn't a ton of it in Peru. There wasn't culturally too much of it, but here in South Korea, it's a very big aspect of it. Not only Bitcoin, but also just the wider cryptocurrency area in general. Busan is labeled as an official crypto hub of South Korea as well. I don't know if that's done too much quite yet, but the country is trying as much as possible to adapt the new technology and move forward with it as well.
It's interesting.
So it's everywhere.
I was in Hong Kong in December, and I saw a couple of these storefront shops. Like you have these exchange shops where you can change dollars to Hong Kong dollars. And they were just crypto. They had all the crypto logos on top. Bitcoin and Ethereum were the main ones, and they were big. Big sort of obviously quite expensively furnished places, and people were just coming in, and there was a steady stream of people selling Bitcoin for cash and everything, and it was like an exchange thing. And that's a real thing in Hong Kong. It's a real, like, on the street, you can see it thing happening there.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that makes it, interesting for international people, is that as you move around and you choose to take some of your wealth with you, that it's basically universally recognized and usable in every country, and you can send it from that country to any other place. So it is super valuable in that aspect. There's one story I wanted to tell too while we still have some time, and it ties back to when I first started teaching, and it was in Ecuador. And at that time, there wasn't really internet banking. There wasn't Ubers. So when you set up your bank account, you got a text message when you made a withdrawal to confirm that the withdrawal went through. So I was on my couch one night, and all of a sudden my phone goes off, and bing, it says, "Thank you for withdrawing $300. Bing, thank you for withdrawing $300. And it was this text message over and over and over again until whoever had access to my account had totally drained it. And, it was a Friday night. So by the time Monday, afternoon rolled around, when I could actually go to the bank and deal with it, like, that money was long gone. And the bank at that time told me, that they said, well, you should be changing your PIN every time you use a bank machine in Ecuador. So this is really on you. So obviously that wasn't a good enough answer. So I started the process with, like, the Ecuadorian Bank Commission to get the money back. And it was years of back and forth. And they would say, yes, you got to pay them back the money. And then they would appeal. The bank would appeal, and they draw it out for months and months and months. Fast forward a few years later, and I'm actually living in Peru, and I get a message being like, all right, this is the Ecuadorian Commission of Banks. This matter is now closed. This bank has to pay you back in 72 hours by the method of your choice. Like, there is no more rebuttals. And so I wrote the bank. I was like, yeah, it's time for you guys to pay back. And they just never did. They're just like, oh,
yeah, so.
Yeah.
So, and then I don't want to get, too much into politics or anything like that as well. But there was also an incident in Canada fairly recently where people involved in a political protest had their banks just turned off. So I'm not here to say that banks are not safe and they're not a good place to keep your money. That's not what I'm trying to push. But
it's true.
Do you want to have 100% of your wealth stored in a bank? I mean, that's an honest question. Or do you want to take control of a piece of it for yourself, the piece of it which you feel comfortable with? And maybe for some people that's 1%, maybe for other people that's 25%. That's a very personal question. But I don't think it's a given that money in the bank is quite what we think it is.
Yeah. And I think also as the landscape of geopolitics and the economy and all these existential threats, we're realizing that the idea of cash or the ATM machine, there's definitely, we need to be thinking differently. And I think that's what's so interesting about Bitcoin is that it's a very potentially a really powerful new way to look at money and interactions between people. I think it's just, it's great to have an educator and a person like yourself, Dale, sharing that because you're giving a very level-headed, very grounded view. And I don't think we have enough of that. And that's part of the problem where these myths and this perception kind of pollutes the reality because, listening to you, you're giving good advice. It's about being cautious, doing your research and not putting all your eggs in the same basket. And I think, many people have said that over time, but sometimes we forget how important that is.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
John, you mentioned earlier, like you had a story about your daughter and cryptocurrency. Was that?
Oh
is that
no, I
something
think
you-
there's
something
just
you
some
can share?
there's just some organizations that FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried had really. He was very involved in the political field and other NGOs. Really good stuff. I mean, it was, but of course, when his empire crumbled, a lot of these organizations, that was kind of the domino effect is, if the federal government was going to start requiring all these monies back, many organizations that he'd been involved with were definitely negatively impacted. And I think, we have to remember that too.
Sure.
It's the same with, banks. If banks go, there are all these other people that have their terrible stories. We have a million anecdotes with 2008 and the house loans and things like that. So no, I just think, that story was that some crypto Bitcoin story went haywire, and there's always other people on the very low level that get impacted indirectly.
Definitely. And the Sam Bankman-Fried is an interesting one because, that doesn't say anything against Bitcoin. Bitcoin didn't, he didn't affect Bitcoin, but it did show that he did a lot of really shady financial stuff, which I'm just actually reading about now. But essentially, if you had money on his exchange, you might not get it all back, So
Exactly.
that's why the risk of, like I was saying, once you get into Bitcoin, look at holding your own private keys. Don't keep all your money on an exchange because it could do an FTX.
Yeah, and by the time this guy comes out, that guy will be long in jail. So I think he's going to be sentenced in February, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think so.
He's
Yeah,
found guilty on all counts. So and that is one part of the story, John. And I don't want to minimize it. And a lot of people did get hurt, and that is definitely something to be aware of if you're going to get involved in the space. But since he was found guilty, there's also been another kind of part of this as well, where the government, the SEC, just approved 11 Bitcoin ETFs to go live, and which are trading right now.
That's positive. So, that's great.
Yeah. So at the same time as the charlatans are being shaken out, there are great financial instruments that are opening up that are making it more accessible. It's not quite the same as what we're talking about with holding it yourself in private keys, but it is an option for people if they want to go and explore that as well. So. And for every Sam Bankman-Fried, you have, Larry Fink and all of the heads of many major financial institutions who are saying this is a fantastic thing. This is something that you have to have some allocation to. And maybe that's one of the things that, I often think about for schools. What is going to be the first school that actually holds this as part of their treasury? Who is the first director of a school who's willing to put in 1% or 2%? And if you game it out and you think kind of down the road, when that school, if it works out and that school is on a completely new financial footing, what is that going to mean to other international schools? And is that going to kind of kick off a game theory type scenario where if you really value taking care of the school's finances, this is something you have to have a small allocation to.
As part of your portfolio, absolutely.
Yeah.
Dale, we're coming to the end of our podcast. What we like to do is always, is there anything you would like, a piece of wisdom or something that you'd like to highlight for our audience who are international educators and international leaders? Just something on this topic, because it's been really interesting hearing both Dan and you.
A piece of advice I could give, I would just say to everyone who's listening to this, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So yes, it can be a harrowing, wild space, but there is something going on here for sure. And I don't know about you guys, but I can't think of anything that once it's gone digital we've said, no, we're going to go back to analog. I think digital money is coming. And I think the question is going to be, what digital money do we want it to be a part of? The one that's public and fair and open, or do we want a different version to come our way? And so that is definitely worth something. And then the other thing I want to end with is you can do this. You can participate in this. You can safely hold and store it. And this is something that is in the reach of everyone who wants to, save that time that you put into the school, save it in something that is going to be worth as much as what you put into it down the road.
Fantastic. And I just want to remind people, Dale's been very kind to put some show notes together. So those are some resources that he's shared on this topic and also his own professional journey. So definitely pop over to the show notes. Okay, when you guys are all billionaires, just invite me. I'm happy to clean your garden.
Well, all penniless. We'll see. Look, again, obviously, just to reiterate, not financial advice. Dale and me are just a topic we're interested in. We're not big holders of Bitcoin. Well, I don't know about Dale, but it's just something we're interested in. So, Dale, huge thank you. It was really interesting to hear about your career, and about Bitcoin. So, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having
you, Dale.
me. Fantastic. Thanks.